Hey everyone, welcome to the Eat to Win show where sports nutrition meets peak performance. Get ready for expert insights, real stories, and tips to help you win with every meal. Let's dive in.
Hey, and welcome to the Eat to Win podcast show. I'm your host, Tavis Piatoli, and we're here to talk all things sports nutrition and how we help athletes win. Today, we're excited to welcome Lauren Thomas. She's a sports dietitian. She's also the US Performance Nutritionist for Maurten. She specializes in fueling strategies for endurance athletes and has incredible insights into cutting-edge technology and topics like sodium bicarbohydrate supplementation, which I've used this before with athletes. I absolutely love it. There is a place where sodium bicarb can be incredibly effective, and I'm excited to learn more what Lauren has to say. Also, we're going to talk a little bit about carbohydrate fueling, right? So we're in this world where people just demonize carbs. They think carbs are the evil devil, and I disagree. And I know when we're talking performance, there's going to be a really important place. So I'm excited to learn more about that. So Lauren, let's dive into this podcast. Let's kind of learn about the science around performance optimization. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for asking.
As we were talking offline, you're in DC, right? So I'm in New Orleans. I'm like, I love DC. One of my favorite trips to DC, I got on one of those little scooters that you can rent and just kind of travel around. And the worst thing I did was I was looking at my phone, listening to my GPS, and then I almost lost control, almost went flying. And I was like, probably not a good idea to look at a phone GPS while you're on these little things.
Yeah.
All right. Let's kind of dive in. I'm excited to learn a little bit more about what you have to say. First of all, what inspired you to kind of focus on the endurance athlete, especially endurance athlete nutrition and the team at Maurten?
Yeah. So I actually grew up a gymnast and a springboard diver. So I was not an endurance athlete, more power and just very different fueling, just completely different approach. And then when I got out of college and finished my diving career, I started running and I realized that this was a completely different game in terms of how I was needing to fuel and that feeling that you can get when you're just totally out of energy. And I was like, there's something here. I need to learn more about this, just self-serving, honestly. And then I got hooked on this whole endurance fueling world and the sports nutrition behind it. I just found fascinating that something that you can do can help your performance so much.
Is that kind of how your career path, because a lot of people ask, as dietitian, how did you figure out how to choose your career path? Is that kind of what led you being an athlete and wanting to kind of get into sports nutrition?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. It was more just personal experience of realizing that food made such a difference in how I felt and wanting to learn more. And then I realized I'm spending all of my time reading about nutrition and it can actually be a career.
Yeah, no, it's fun. It really is. And it's good to hear about your path. Now, sodium bicarb, I know that's one of the topics we talked about. It's been around for a very long time, right? And a lot of people still, if you say that in the athlete space, it doesn't get the attention of the creatines of the world, the protein powders. But can you explain how it works as a buffer for endurance athletes and just kind of what it is?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, as you said, it's been around for so many, 40 plus years of research behind it. And, it's one of the International Olympic Committee's 5 really performance enhancing supplements that we can trust, but it's really not utilized that often because of the potential gastrointestinal side effects there. So I think, what's been very interesting is seeing how we can almost open up this window of being able to utilize sodium bicarb without having to run to the bathroom. So for those of, us who aren't maybe as aware of what sodium bicarbonate does, it's a buffer, right? So essentially what it's going to do is as we're doing high intensity exercise, we're going to be building up that acidity in our muscles, right? A lot of us have felt that burning feeling before in those higher pushes, higher intensity anaerobic efforts. And those hydrogen ions that are building up in there, what sodium bicarbonate can do is help pull those out of the muscle and balance out the pH so you can sustain a higher, intensity and higher level of effort for longer while just buffering out some of that acidity. So again, it's a great, product. However, because of, that CO2 creation, when it hits the stomach acid, it can get a bit of a challenge for people. So I think that's, there's been so much promise with this supplement, but oftentimes in application it gets lost.
Yeah, no, you're right. A lot of the research I've read is watch out for the GI system. And what people might not realize is many of us have sodium bicarb maybe sitting in our refrigerator in baking soda. And so if you need to go to the bathroom, it's probably not a good idea. Like if you struggle to just don't go get baking soda and start going, this is going to help me go. it's probably going to cause some issues. You
Exactly.
guys, Maurten has created really a solution to kind of address the GI system from what I've seen, and really with your product of sodium bicarb that's associated with those issues. Can you tell us about those innovations? What makes it unique, and how do they improve the tolerance in the gut?
Absolutely. What's going on at Maurten is essentially trying to solve problems through innovation, and education, of course, but saying, well, this is an issue. We know the supplement works, but a lot of times it leads to this performance paradox of not really being able to work for the long term. So what Maurten has done is essentially use their hydrogel technology, which is what is found in our carbohydrate-based products, which, just quick intro to hydrogel is it essentially acts like a sponge. So it's a 3D matrix that is often used in the pharmaceutical industry. And it's created by fibers that are from seaweed and apples, fibers in nature that kind of create this sponge-like structure that soaks up the carbohydrate and then delivers it smoothly and quickly through the stomach. So in our carbohydrate products, the hydrogel masks the carbohydrates and takes them, but in our sodium bicarbonate, essentially the same idea. It's going to be the transporter. So that 3D sponge, for lack of better words, is going to encapsulate the sodium bicarbonate, the baking soda, like you mentioned, and carry it through smoother and protected from that stomach acid. So it's more of a transport system than it is anything else. It's still sodium bicarbonate at the end of the day. It's going to be encapsulated in a carbohydrate-rich sponge, for lack of better words, to take it through. Again, just being able to access that and have it go through our stomach smoother and quicker.
That sounds so much better than the stuff I've used in the past where literally before they had this technology, 10, 15 years ago, I was working with a high-performance Olympic track sprinter. She was probably the 5th fastest lady in the world. And we used sodium bicarb. And it was basically a very small fraction of baking soda, just enough based on the science to say this much. I forgot the dosage at the time. Mix in a carbohydrate beverage. That way it's easier to deliver or deliver a little bit faster. But there was no product like this. So it's good to have technology and obviously gels that people can use. Now, I guess a lot of people are going to want to know, all right, well, that's great, but how much can I use? What's the dosage? So what is the timing of this? What is the dosage? How much should someone use of sodium bicarbonate? And is there a certain type of athlete that would benefit the most from this supplement?
So the protocol is actually super important here, right? Because we want to be very specific with how to use it to mitigate the chances of any GI stomach side effects. So, we look at a couple things. The first thing is the timing, and that's, because we use what we call enteric-coated mini tablets. So they're a slower release mini tablet of sodium bicarbonate. We want to take that about 90 minutes to 2 hours before the exercise start or the race start. And we want to do that after we've eaten a meal, right? So we want to have food in our stomachs, wait 30, 60 minutes, have the sodium bicarbonate system, with Maurten, and then have about 2 hours to let those blood bicarbonate levels rise to their peak. So that time to peak, we're seeing about 90 minutes to 2 hours. And that way we know that when the gun goes off or when the race starts, you're getting the maximum benefit of buffering that you can get. We also offer many different sizes of the bicarb. So essentially what that means is the dosing is dialed into the athlete's weight. So we don't want to be guessing, right? We want to be really specific with this. And in the research, we're seeing about 0.2 to 0.3 grams per kilogram for the athlete's weight being the sweet spot. Going over that isn't necessarily going to give us additional benefit and probably just, again, risk of side effects there. So we have the dosing that is, dialed into the athlete's needs. And then we know that we're getting the amount that can give a benefit without necessarily, pushing the limit there. And then I would say in terms of the question of who does this benefit, I would say, really what we're seeing is athletes that are doing any quality anaerobic session. So maybe that's, on the track, doing a threshold workout, on the bike, a triathlete. That being said, swimmers, rowers, anyone that's doing those higher intensity ice hockey, like those times when you're going to be really pushing, recovering, that bicarb can really help with that buffering system and being able to enhance that, intensity for longer.
Excellent. Yeah. So if young athletes, if you're listening, I know young athletes typically have a mindset of, ooh, I can take 5 grams. Let's take 10 or 15. This is not something you want to play around with and take 0.4 or 0.6 grams per kg because your stomach's going to be in severe GI stress. So be things like this and then follow the science, but also follow the dosage guidelines. Last question on sodium bicarb, recent studies suggest that it benefits activities, like you said, up to 60 minutes, maybe 90 minutes and things like that, or just that high performance. The rower, I have a 13-year-old that plays club volleyball, which probably not going to be pushing sodium bicarb yet to that, but it's a stop and go. Any other research, or can you share some of the new research or just research on the implication around sodium bicarb and what it's showing?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, the traditional view of sodium bicarbonate is sprinters, right? It's 12 minutes or less activity. It's only for those, shorter sessions. And I think, as we start to see athletes be able to tolerate sodium bicarb, we can see that oftentimes, potentially in the past, the research ended at 12 minutes because the side effects were so strong. So now that we've taken that out, I think, we're starting to see the application for longer periods of time. And when you start to think about endurance activity, oftentimes it's not a steady state, static, effort. There's surges, there's climbs, there's race tactics, and these are going to be increasing the intensity and backing off and increasing the intensity and backing off. So I think, it really offers some insight there of, hey, sodium bicarbonate can actually be utilized in a 2-hour race. Maybe it's a half marathon. Maybe, we have a lot of our full marathoners, our Tour de France riders, they're doing longer distance, but because there's those pushes and surges that they are going to build up that acidity, the bicarbonate could be useful. We have some, again, like you mentioned, some research recently. There was a 60-minute time trial on a bike showing about 1.5% benefit using the sodium bicarbonate in the performance. And, again, we have lots of anecdotal evidence from those longer distance endurance. So I think it's a fun time to be in the research world and in the science world, because I think we're going to be learning more about how the application can be utilized.
Well, when you mentioned Tour de France, it makes me think, wow, as they're getting deeper into that event, the climbs and going through, it's like, can we use this multiple times? Obviously there's places where you probably would recommend someone use that, but as they're grueling through an hour and they got, a few hours left, do they use it again and again? It's like, I don't know how that would actually work for that type of athlete. That's not the traditional rower. That's maybe an hour, they're done. And the Tour de France riders got a couple of hours of just, and I think that's probably the most challenging event of any sport in the entire world.
Unbelievable demands from the body there, right? And I think what's also interesting is because our sodium bicarbonate is longer release, it's actually the bicarbonate levels in the blood are staying elevated for 6-8+ hours. So we have some wiggle room here of that window to utilize in endurance exercise. So again, I think it's just, we're learning about the application for these different types of sports.
Gotcha. Okay. Let's take a short little break as we pause for our sponsor break. Stay with us as we take a little bit of a short break. You're listening to Tavis Piatoli with the Eat to Win podcast.
Liquid Fuel is a new sports and hydration product formulated by a sports dietitian to give athletes the edge to train and compete longer. It contains the low glycemic carbohydrate platinose, designed to keep blood sugar levels more stable to provide energy for 3 to 4 hours without the blood sugar crash seen in other leading sports drinks. Its unique 4-part electrolyte formula includes 50% of your daily magnesium need to optimize muscle function. Liquid Fuel is naturally sweetened, along with no artificial ingredients or colors. Currently being used by high school, collegiate, and professional teams, Liquid Fuel allows you to live life with the confidence knowing you're properly fueling your body. Visit drinkliquidfuel.com and use the code MSD10 to get 10% off your offer.
All right, welcome back to the Eat to Win podcast, where we're jumping back right in with Lauren.Thomas, sports dietitian for Maurten. We're talking about cutting edge strategies for endurance athletes. So let's kind of jump back into this topic. We're going to shift a little bit now as we move from sodium bicarb to now talking about carbohydrates, right? Carbohydrates, an important fuel for exercise. Some people are trying to do some of these, I don't want to say crazy diets, but they're eating carnivore, they're going completely keto, and then they're trying to have more power in endurance. And maybe we don't have enough research in some of those areas, but I know there's been a lot of research on the low carb ketogenic side, which didn't seem to really show any benefits for certain type of athletes. But when we look at carb fueling, there's a lot of incredible research. Carb fueling is critical, right? We know that, Lauren, and you guys have products and things that are going to help with that. But why is there such a gap between what's recommended in the literature and what athletes practice?
Yeah, I think it's mixed, right? When you look at the literature for endurance exercise, the recommendations during activity of, over 2.5 hours is up to 90 grams of carbohydrates per hour. And that can be a lot for an athlete who isn't used to fueling regularly. And then I think there's a lot of noise, like you said, in terms of, do I need carbohydrates? The media, just like the mixed messaging that can come can be a really confusing times. Athletes, then they might try fueling and their stomach hurts and then they don't do it again, right? So I think we kind of get into this gray zone of, I know I need to, but I don't feel good when I do it. But do I even need to? And there's just a lot of confusion. I think, again, the other thing is just we want an athlete to feel good when they're fueling. And if the needs are here, but they're only taking in, just a little bit, they might be hesitant to move up in that fueling strategy if their stomach doesn't handle it well.
Yeah. And you guys have this hydrogel technology, or it's basically a delivery service of carbohydrate. Explain a little bit about how that works, why it was created, why it's been so effective at kind of mitigating some of the GI issues.
Yeah. So again, athlete first, right? How do we solve this problem of athletes, requiring 90 grams of carb per hour when they're doing really longer endurance exercise, but only being able to tolerate 30 grams, right? So how do we get that gap filled? And Maurten has come through with a pharmaceutical industry approach, like you said, the hydrogel that can carry those carbohydrates through the stomach quicker and easier with a faster kind of gastric emptying, which essentially is meaning, hey, it's not going to sit in your stomach, right? It's going to kind of move through a little bit quicker. And then you're not going to have sloshing around, any of those GI side effects that runners, cyclists, triathletes, you name it, might have felt before. Really, we started with our drink mix, and that's our drink mix 320 that has 80 grams of carbohydrates in a 16-ounce bottle. Now that's a lot, right? Think of a typical sports drink of 6 to 8% carbohydrates. This is up to 14. And I think, it allows an athlete to get in a more concentrated amount of carbohydrates in a smaller, delivery system, the bottle. I think, again, Maurten's really just trying to make higher carbohydrate fueling more accessible to athletes.
Yeah, and that's important. I mean, it's good to have, obviously, we know there's a lot of carbohydrate sources out there, but there's some that just don't really work for athletes. And I think it's important too for them to experiment during these practice and training sessions. So when you look at gut training for that higher carb intake, because you're recommending maybe 90 grams an hour as they're training, and maybe using a lower to help them kind of adjust, but is there a way for them to approach, like, let's say, gut training to help them reach that higher carbohydrate target?
At first, it's starting small, right? You don't want to start right at 90 grams an hour. You want to start at 30. You want to see how that feels. You want to start during an easy run versus a harder, high intensity track workout, right? So really doing it step by step here and say, okay, I did a couple of weeks at 30 grams. I felt good. Can we get it up to 45 grams an hour? And then once you nail that down, it's how does that feel when you're running up a hill? How does that feel when you're in the heat? How does that feel when you're, in a higher intensity session? So really training the gut is training it across different environments and training it up to the level, if not higher than the level that you might do on race day. So if you're used to getting in 90 grams, then you can feel confident knowing that in the marathon, you'll get in 80 grams and feel good. So it takes time. It's a commitment for sure.
Yeah, I've talked to friends and I've had some clients over the years that they'll be going to the bathroom because they're like, oh, I tried something new the day of the race. And I'm like, oh, no, that's not the strategy we discussed. Why did you do that? And because they heard from another friend that did the race and that worked for them. And I'm like, oh, like you said, you got to adjust and acclimate. Just like you acclimate to heat, you got to acclimate to your nutrition as well. Carb loading. We get a lot of questions about that. And that's something that still people ask. Do I need a load? Should I load, especially depending on the race? But it's a tried and true strategy for some. Are there any best practices, for achieving optimal glycogen stores before a race?
So if you're going to be doing an event that's over 90 minutes, it's probably worth looking at your carbohydrate intake in the 2 days before. And that might mean increasing it up to, maybe 10 grams per kilogram of body weight. That's a lot of carbohydrates. I think to simplify that for people, I try to say, all right, big picture, you're making 3/4 of your plate carbohydrates, and that's going to be lower fiber options, lower fat options to make room to get in all of that carb. I find, adding in beverages, like whether it's a sport drink like Maurten or something else, to just get in liquid calories to help you reach those higher amounts without feeling like so full and just like eating your body weight in pasta, which, can be fun, but maybe not feel so good on race days. Really dialing in those 36 hours before carbohydrates are going to be the name of the game there, and it'll really pay off come the race day that your glycogen stores are saturated.
See, I was going to ask, you mentioned pasta. And I was like, this is a perfect way for me to be a little funny and make this even enjoyable. So for my 90-minute workout sessions, where in the morning, we're probably 20 minutes, or the sauna, the hot tub recovering. Sir, I guess I don't need a big, massive plate of pasta before I go to bed. No,
Right.
like you said, I love pasta. Like I was like, oh man, it gets demonized, and I'll have a little bit, but it's like like back in the day when I played high school football, I felt like I can eat all the pasta I wanted. Now I'm like almost 50 going, can't eat as much pasta as I used to because it's probably not going to go where it needs to go. All right.
Right.
Let's a couple more questions I want to kind of dive in. We've talked about sodium bicarb, but let's kind of compare the two, sodium bicarb versus carb. I mean, sodium, it's kind of funny. Sodium bicarb versus carbohydrates. It's almost kind of sound like the same thing. You mentioned it gives you that extra 1% for the sodium bicarbonate, but can you elaborate why it's critical to maybe prioritize carbohydrate fueling first?
Yeah. So carbohydrates are energy, right? They're going to be the energy for the working muscle. And that is going to be your priority as an athlete, no matter what sport, what activity you're doing. And that's going to, be the name of the game for performance. Now, I like to think of it as gas in the car, right? We can't move the car if we don't have the gas, and the carbohydrates are the gas in the car. Now, I see the bicarbonate as the turbo, right? You need to have the baseline there before you can get up to the sodium bicarbonate. Now, even in the research, right, we're seeing 8 to 10% improvement with just carbohydrate fueling during a race. That's massive when you think about it, right? So that's going to be your priority as an athlete, no matter what. Once you nail that down, that extra 1%, 2% from sodium bicarbonate, yes, can be the layering in when appropriate in race day. So I think it's really differentiating the two of saying, how do I make sure my carbohydrate is nailed down? And then on those important race days or really quality workouts, maybe we're layering in some sodium bicarbonate for that extra 1% and better recovery.
You mentioned the 1%, the 2%, and then the 10%. But if you go back, I thought the Summer Olympics was phenomenal. There was so many just good events, swimming and some of these others. But if you go back and you look at some of these races, track and field swim, some came down to those hundredths of a second or 10,000, whatever. I can't do math anymore. I used to do math really well, but now it's like I don't remember all the decimal. Anyway, they were very close, right? Split seconds to win. But that's where that 1 or 2% comes in, where you're like, will this give me that little edge where I touch the wall before my, is it gold or silver? So that's where that 10% can be. For us, it might not be significant. Like if I play pickleball, if I win by 10%, it's not that big of a deal. But for someone for gold medal, that's a big deal. So I think they're looking for that edge, and that could be a way to get that. Advice to endurance athletes, right? So when you're looking, endurance athletes are always looking for advice. I'm actually presenting to tonight a group 2 runners just near the hometown. A friend of mine's like, can you talk about, just answer these questions? Sure, no problem. But what advice would you give endurance athletes looking to refine their fueling strategies for these longer events? Those that might be like, all right, I'm going to start going to longer events. So I want to go from a half marathon to a full. What advice would you maybe give them?
So much, but I would say big picture, like zoom out from just during the activity and start to look at what are you doing before and what are you doing after? Because doesn't happen in a vacuum. And we need to make sure the carbohydrate intake through your meal before and your recovery meal is going to be solid enough to support your training. And that carbohydrate the needs are going to increase as your running mileage or intensity goes up, and maybe decrease as it goes down. So it's a, kind of a sliding scale there to start to be aware of that we have to adjust our carbohydrate intake to match what the demands on our body are. And that's what I would recommend to all athletes, all endurance athletes specifically of, hey, your long run days, you're going to need more carbohydrate before, during, after than maybe your rest day, right? So starting to look at that.
You make a great point, because I think a lot of people like that nutrition periodization. People don't maybe always adjust their calorie needs for those longer output days. It's like, all right, you're driving the car an extra couple of miles or a couple of 100 miles. You got to put more fuel in it, but they might be trying to eat the same thing for a certain outcome. I want to lose weight and run, but I'm going 18 miles today instead of 6. You need a lot more calories. You need a lot more calories on those days, I would assume. Yeah. All right. Last question. Let's kind of close out with one takeaway, a call to action. If there's one key takeaway that you'd like our audience and kind of remember about fueling strategy for endurance athletes, and then where they, what would that be? And then also share more information about where they can connect with you and maybe reach out and learn more about the products that you guys have.
Yeah, gosh, one takeaway. I would say it's learn your body and learn how you feel when you start to increase your fueling. Keep a training log, have some kind of way to jot down notes of how you feel when you fuel different ways and start to connect those and really learn how you respond to different products or different approaches to fueling. So then come race day or game day or whatever it is that you feel really confident in what you're doing and find a way to say, all right, how can I get closer to the carbohydrate needs that my body has? And so that would be kind of just a big takeaway. It's kind of simple, but I think sometimes looked over. And I would just direct people towards Maurten.com in terms of, a lot of our content is going to be there in terms of education. And that's my main role there is how do we educate an athlete to not only use the product, but understand why they're using it and what they can get out of it. So hopefully lots of educational resources on there. And we also have fuel guides. So it's, okay, I'm running a half marathon. How do I fuel for that? And they can pull that up and hopefully implement it and make it work for them.
Awesome. This is great information. So we all have all of the information on where they can go to the website of the company and kind of learn more about the products that you have. I'm going to do something that you're not going to be aware of. I'm going to have what's called curveball questions. Just 2 questions, completely not related to anything we're talking about nutrition, right? Because that's fun, but people are like, all right, I'm getting bored. I'm saying that, but let's learn something about Lauren that we don't know about. I'm going to ask this first question because I love music more than probably most other things. If I can go back in life, I'd be a musician. If you could be the lead singer of any band, musician group today in the past, who would that be?
That's a good question. Of any band, let's see. I would probably say I would be the lead singer of the Beatles.
Yes. Okay. All right.
Because I want to see
this question because the answers I get are always like way all over the place. I'm looking going, all right, who's it going to be?
Yeah.
So, Lauren, you've been in practice for a while. You've been a sports dietitian for a while. What's the one, and this is a tough question, I think, because I know when I think about this, when people have answered this question, they're like, oh gosh, if you can go back to your younger self, based on what you've learned, what would you tell her? Like if there's one piece of advice you would give Lauren that was in college and before she's starting her career, is there anything you would tell yourself?
That's hard. I would say, well, I guess, is the question related to sports nutrition and fueling or just general?
Anything.
Okay.
You can be like, oh, I would have invested in Bitcoin back then.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's just really not being afraid to lean on mentors and really learn from the people that are several years ahead, if not more, and just be able to soak in information more. I think I was very hesitant and nervous to, pick the brains of people that have been in the shoes that I want to get in. And that would have been something that just builds your awareness. And as I've, kind of grown throughout my career, realize the importance of mentors and those who are in the field that maybe you want to get into, even if you don't know what you're going to ask. They'll just build a relationship and start to learn from them, because I think those experiences can just enrich, your own understanding. So that would be my advice.
That's phenomenal advice. And if you're a young RD or in any profession, especially around sports medicine, reach out to as many people as you possibly can. Volunteer. I think that will get you to so many different places, and they see that work ethic. So Lauren, thank you so much for your time, expertise today. It's just a phenomenal episode. We really appreciate you being here.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
That's it for today's episode of the Winner's Circle and the Eat to Win podcast show. A huge thank you to Lauren Thomas for sharing her expertise on fueling strategies for endurance athletes. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with your community. Until next time, keep winning.
Thanks for joining us on the Eat to Win show. Remember, every meal is a step toward victory. Until next time, stay strong and keep winning.